Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and our small assembled company of today, we're here with our beloved US friend Bob Kanegis, who is going to give us some pretty good children's tales, I'm sure. I look forward to hearing you. Bob, have you got something for us today?
Well, thank you for that smiling, cheerful introduction. And sure, yeah, I have something. It's so interesting because I see a few adults in the room with me, and I just have to imagine that there are children and other adults out there. So that's what storytellers do, right? We imagine. So I'm just trying to imagine everybody out there.
I'm sure that there
I
will
am.
be children listening to you online, Bob. There are always children listening online. Plus, if you look really carefully, you might catch a glimpse of Baba's and my inner child. So take it away, Bob.
Well, I always say if you're older than yesterday and younger than tomorrow, you're probably still in touch with that inner child. Well, so for those of you who don't know me, I am in New Mexico near Albuquerque. If I look out my window, I am looking at the Sandia Mountains, and uh, I'm close to the Rio Grande River. So big sky. And I thought I would just start today by I hope many of you are lucky enough to have a little bit of nature, even if it's only a flower in a flower box. But here in New Mexico, where I live in my neighborhood, there's almost not a day of the year when I go out and I don't see rabbits, roadrunners, quail, often coyotes. And just before I came in and sat down here at my desk, I was out in my garden. I had an amazing experience. I was looking at a particular plant. It's called the rue. And there's only one type of butterfly in the world who comes to pollinate it and lay her eggs on that plant. And there she was fluttering, one fluttering from flower to flower, and I was completely lost in that. And suddenly I thought another butterfly joined her. And then I realized right in front of my nose, this close, was a hummingbird just giving me just looking me straight in the eye. It was just so exciting. These animals that we have here are mostly a wonderful thing, but there are times when I am not so fond of the pretty little bunny rabbits. I was remembered last year, we were growing all kinds of things in our garden. It was just starting, but there was one rabbit. This rabbit kept sneaking into our garden, which was, I could see right outside my front window. And one day, and I knew it was the same rabbit because that rabbit had had a fight with a coyote, and his nose was kind of had been bloodied and scarred. Well, that rabbit was chewing on our fresh little carrots, and this day I got mad at that. That was enough. I caught a glimpse of that rabbit. I was sure it was that rabbit, and so I decided I was going to very quietly get to the door, open it up, and scare the rabbit and just have him run, scare that rabbit so badly that he would never come back again. So that's what I did. But it wasn't a rabbit. What I had seen was a mother quail. That mom quail, little bird with a funny little feather on the top of its head, had at least 12, maybe 13 or 14 tiny little quail babies. And I had seen the mother, and I scared them all right. I scared them so badly that they all scattered. They just all scattered. They ran this way and that way. The mother quail ran up and sat on top of the wall of the garden. But one of the little babies got this, I guess, disoriented and ran into the open door of our house. And now we had a little baby quail in the house. It took an hour for us to finally catch the little baby quail without hurting it. The mom was sitting up on top of the wall, just crying and calling pitifully. Finally, caught the little bird. I let it out the front gate, and I saw it kind of waddle off. And I thought, I think it went into underneath that big sagebrush that was just on the other side of the wall. And so I got down on my hands and knees, and I looked up, looked underneath through the roots, and what did I see? A rabbit with a carrot. And I'm telling you, I was sure that that little rabbit was just making faces at me and going, so I've never, I have never forgotten that. And when I was thinking about sharing that story with everybody this morning, it reminded me of a story that my friend Joe Hayes, who's a wonderful storyteller who lives about an hour north of here. I was up playing music with him yesterday. Well, Joe tells the story that is his way of retelling a Native American coyote story. Now, coyote stories are told all over New Mexico, and I know some of you have heard coyote stories before. And this is one I had forgotten about until I thought about this rabbit encounter I had last year. It's Coyote and the Quails. So quails are very timid birds, or they seem to be. They always seem to be running away from something. Some people make fun and say, "Oh, they're just kind of not scaredy cats, but scaredy birds. They're always just." And when they run away fast. They don't fly very well, so they tend to run away. The other bird that runs a lot that we have here is the roadrunner. And the roadrunner is considered to be even though he's always running, he's considered to be a fierce bird because the roadrunner can even kill a rattlesnake. But not all quail, as it turns out, are timid. So coyote is always chasing quails and making life miserable for quails. And of course, you don't want coyote to catch you if you're a quail because you're going to be lunch or dinner. So they're used to running away from coyote all the time. Now, one day, coyote was full and tired. He had eaten a good meal of field mice. He stretched himself out underneath the shade of a little bush and went to sleep. He was really sleeping soundly. And along came a covey of quails, and they saw their enemy, Coyote, sleeping. And one of the quails, a bold quail, said, "Oh, this is a chance to have some fun. This is a chance to get even with Coyote, who has given us so much trouble. Let's pull the hairs from his tail while he's sleeping." Oh, the other little quail said, "Oh, no, no, we shouldn't do that. Oh, no, we don't want to wake him up." But the brave quail said, watch me." That brave quail went up to Coyote, looked at him carefully, made sure that he was asleep, and pulled out one of his tails. All the rest of the quails laughed. And then that gave them a little bit of courage, a little bit of confidence. One after another, again and again, while Coyote slept, the quails snuck up and pluck until after a while, Coyote's tail was naked. There wasn't a single hair left on his tail. It looked more like an opossum tail than a coyote tail. And then the quails scattered, laughing to see what would happen when Coyote woke up. Well, Coyote woke up. He just woke up and decided to trot on and go about his business. He didn't even look at his tail. So off he went with his tail held high, as coyotes do when they're feeling good. Oh, he had his tail up high. He was trotting along, and now he passed the quail that were hiding in the bushes. They laughed as he went by. He heard them. Who's that? Who's laughing at me? Nobody. Nobody's laughing at you, Coyote. That must have been a bee buzzing in your ear. Coyote kept going. Who's that laughing at me? Nobody's laughing at you, said one of the quails hiding out of the bush. Oh, you just hear the wind. You just hear the wind. But finally, Coyote walked by a prickly pear cactus. We have prickly pear cactus right here in our backyard. Prickly pear and cactus. Well, usually when Coyote has all that fur on his tail, he can walk right by a cactus and it's no problem. But because his tail was naked, it pricked and stung him. And he turned around and then he looked at his tail and he saw that there wasn't a hair on it. And now he knew why the quails were laughing at him. Suddenly he saw one of the quails, saw a whole covey of the quails. He ran after them, and it was quite a chase. Now, the quails ran this way and that way, and Coyote ran this way and that way. The quails were getting really worn out, really tired. Coyote was probably going to catch more than one of them when that brave quail saw an old abandoned rabbit hole. Follow me, said Quail. But before he went down into the hole, he grabbed a piece of that prickly pear cactus and he pushed it in front of him. And now Coyote was at the hole, digging to try and pull out the little quail. And he did. He pulled out the last quail that had run in and he said, "Were you the one who was laughing at me?" Oh, no, said the quail. It wasn't me. It was probably one of the other quail. So Coyote let that quail go. "I'll get the one that was laughing at me." He caught another quail. "Are you the one that was laughing at me?" Well, no, Coyote. It was the one that was deeper in the hole than me. And that kept happening and happening and happening until finally Coyote had dug down in the hole deep enough to catch that brave quail. "Are you the one that was laughing at me? Are you the one that pulled out the hairs of my tail?" Oh no, said the brave quail. It was the first one that went into the hole. And so Coyote let the brave quail go to get the one he thought had started all the trouble. And if you've been listening, you know what he grabbed. He took a big bite onto that prickly pear cactus. He let out a howl that's probably still echoing all across the mountains and canyons and arroyos of New Mexico. Oh, his mouth was full of cactus spines, and off he went to a little cave at the edge of the mountains where he knew he could curl up and wait until his mouth had healed. He might still be there, or he might be that coyote I saw with a chicken in its mouth down by our mailboxes at the end of the street. That's the story of Coyote and the quails.
Bob, I have a question. Two questions.
Yeah, Baba C.
Great story. Great story. I like that. Prickly
Never
pear.
told it. Never told it before.
I'm enjoying it. I'm trying to figure out a way to make it urban, but that's another
Uh,
story.
uh,
Prickly pear cacti. Are they called that because they make a pear-like fruit? And is that fruit edible?
the fruits of prickly pears are they are edible, and you can even buy them in the markets here. I'm forgetting what they're called. There's a Spanish word for them, and I'll maybe I'll remember before this section is over. But yeah, they're my neighbor up the street makes prickly pear cactus jam from the
Oh,
fruits.
right.
Yeah,
And I
so
have one
yeah.
pun, and this will probably only work for the American audience. But are you aware of the most famous quail in America?
Yeah, I think this is probably only going to work for Americans, but go ahead.
That was Dan Quail, and he ran
Yeah,
for president.
yeah, he ran too, right? Okay,
All
sorry
right.
for people all over the rest of the world who might not get that, but we can return to that another time. All
All right. That was
righty.
for you. I'm going mute.
Well, so that troublesome rabbit that was making fun of me and scrunched up its face, it almost felt like it was sticking out its tongue. When I realized that I was going to tell that story, I remembered another story that I thought would be fun to tell you today. And I learned it from probably one of my favorite books, which I can't even show you. This book is called The Way of the Storyteller. And it was written by Ruth Sawyer way back in 1942. You can do the math. That's a long time ago, just a few years before I was born. There's a story, and she dedicated this book to another storyteller named Johanna or Johanna. And she was from County Donegal in Ireland. And I'm wondering if there's any storytellers from Ireland out listening to this. If there are, thank you for allowing me to tell and share a story that comes from your part of the world. Now the thing is that it comes from Ireland, but this story could probably come from just about anywhere in the world where there is a girl who is really, well, let's just call her a mean girl. Now, there are wonderful, wonderful stories of kind princesses and beautiful princesses, but this is the story of wee Meg Barnaleg, who was probably the meanest, most troublesome girl that you had ever met. Oh, I hope there's no one out there that's just even remotely like wee Meg Barnaleg. Her parents were kind, kind people. You would think that they would be able to raise a kind daughter. I don't know what it was. Now, I should tell you, when I say that Meg Barnaleg was a mean girl, let me give you some examples. First of all, I want to say that if we Meg Barnaleg, we Meg Barnaleg might have been as beautiful as any beautiful princess, if that is, she didn't always have her pickle face. Most of the time when you saw Meg Barnaleg, she was pickle faced and making fun of someone or stamping her foot about what she was going to do or what she wasn't going to do. And while I'm telling you about that, she was, well, I called her pickle faced and potty mouthed, because the words that came out of her mouth sometimes are not words that I would even think of sharing in a storytelling program for adults, even, let alone children. All right. I hope you haven't heard those words, but if you have, I sure hope you don't speak them like Meg Barnaleg was doing all the time. Well, let's see. What else can I tell you about Meg Barnaleg? Oh, well, her mother, her kind mother, made her the most delicious meals. And she made them with love. And if she baked scones for Meg, while she was working the batter, she was trying to put the love of her heart for her daughter into the scones. And then here it was at breakfast. Meg would take a bite of the scone, and then she would take what was left and fling it across the room onto the floor. She would do the same thing. She would do the same thing if her mother made her some nice mush. She'd eat a few spoonfuls and then dump the bowl over, dump it on the cat, throw it across the room. So this is the way that she was with food. She ate what she wanted and she left what she wanted. Now, in those days, you didn't go to the store to buy your clothes. Your mother or another relative, grandmother, maybe it was even a father or an uncle who knew how to sew, made her clothes, made her dresses, and again, with every stitch, thinking about Meg and hoping that Meg would improve her manners, putting love into the clothes that they made for Meg. And so Meg would start the day with a beautiful dress that her mother had made. But by noon, what had she done? She found a thorn bush or a field of thorns that she could run in, or grass that she could roll in, or a hill that she could roll down. And by noon, the dress was torn, tattered, muddy, stained. There might be more than one dress in a day. So all the love that went into food, all the love that went into her clothing, seemed as if Meg didn't care. And then what else can I tell you about Meg? Well, I told you about her language, and we won't say anything more about that, although it does come up later in the story. She's going to pay a price for that. You'll see. Well, what else about Meg? All right, so her parents didn't trust Meg to stay at home by herself. So if they went visiting for a neighbor, for instance, they took Meg with her. When the neighbors saw Meg coming, oh, they hid their best plates. They if they had some fine food that they were saving for a holiday, Meg would be right into the refrigerator without even asking and poking about. So they hid their best stuff. And then Meg would come into the room. Now imagine this. She comes into the room. Her parents are courteous. They're well welcomed. And Meg stands in the middle of the room. She puts her hands on her hips. She looks around like she's the queen of the domain. She says, "Oh, mother, look at that. Do you see the little bit of fray on the curtains? You would think that they had more self-respect than to let a stain or a little tear on a curtain when they had company, wouldn't you?" And then she would pick up the cup, and maybe that she was served tea, and she said, "Oh, look, mother, it looks like this handle has been glued. This must have been a broken cup." And then she'd pull on it to see if it was well mended. And of course, the cup would end up being broken. You get, she would go to funerals and wakes. This is hard to imagine, but while all the people were mourning and talking about the person who had passed away, she would tug on someone's skirts and say, "Isn't it true that Mr. Donnelly was the most? Isn't everybody saying behind his back that he was the stingiest man?" Right there at a funeral. Okay, well, I think I've given you the idea about what kind of child Meg Barnaleg was, as they called her. Now, one day, she decided to have some fun with the neighbor's dog. The neighbor's dog was named Juicy Bones because Juicy Bones loved a big, juicy bone more than anything else. Well, Meg figured out how to tease and torment Juicy Bones. You see, her family had made a ham just a few days ago, and there was a ham bone left over. It was going to be going into a soup that her mother was making, but she took that ham bone. She went outside into her neighbor's yard, where Juicy Bones was tied up with a long chain so he could roam a little bit. And what did she do with that bone? She dangled it right in front of Juicy Bones. Oh, Juicy Bones saw that nice, juicy ham bone, and of course he wanted it. But just as he reached for it, Meg pulled it away. Juicy Bones jumped for the bone and came to the end of his chain and came up short. Oh, Meg laughed and laughed and laughed. She thought that was great fun, teasing the dog like that. Well, she did it a second time. Here, juicy bones, here, juicy bones, here, have a nice little bone. And again, Juicy Bones jumped forward, came to the end of his chain, and just about choked himself. And Meg laughed harder the second time than he did the first. Well, she thought she'd do that one more time. And this is where her troubles really started. Because this time, the chain broke when she yanked the bone away. Juicy Bones made a grab for the ham bone, but not meaning to, he chomped down on wee Meg Barnaleg's leg. He bit her leg. Oh, she let out a scream. And then she turned right around while Juicy Bones still had his teeth on her and turned around and bit him just as hard on Juicy Bones' leg. And here they were, both of them screaming, the dog barking like bloody murder. It sounded like a band of 1,000 banshees. They were rolling around in a cloud of dust, and the neighbors came out and they saw what was happening. You couldn't tell where Juicy Bones started and Meg Barnaleg ended, and they were going around and around. The neighbors thought what to do, and someone came out with a rifle. They thought maybe they would shoot the dog to save Meg. Shoot the dog, someone said, shoot the dog. But about 3/4 of the people out there said, no, don't waste a bullet on the dog. Shoot Meg instead. Well, this is a terrible thing to say, isn't it? Oh, I'm telling the story to children, but this is what they said. No, don't shoot the dog. Shoot Meg. Well, Meg decided what was going to happen. She got the message and she ran for it as fast as she could. Let me take a little drink of water here. We have a little pause here. What's going to happen next? Well, Meg ran and ran and ran till she knew she was going to be safe. She ended up in a large field that the farmers of the village had been clearing and cutting the hay, and they had stacked up haystacks all through the field. Had gone home. It was late in the afternoon. They had left just a little bit of the field uncleared. They'd even left a couple of their rakes to come back to the next morning to work. So here was Meg, alone in the field. She caught her breath. Then she decided to see what kind of trouble she could make right there in the hayfield. And so the first thing that she did is she went to just about every haystack that she could, and she started to scatter all the hay that had been worked up into those haystacks all day. And then she saw the rakes that had been left to work the next day, and she hid those and laughed. Well, it had been an exciting time, to say the least, for Meg, and she was tired from the running, tired from all the excitement. And so she found at the edge of a haystack, she stretched herself out, much the way that Coyote stretched himself out after that good meal of field mice. She fell asleep. She slept soundly. She slept so soundly that the sun had just gone down. The full moon was rising. And Meg was still half asleep, and she heard small little voices. Oh, look at the mess. Look at the mess that Meg Barnaleg, that awful girl, has left. All this hay scattered all about, and broken rakes. Oh, and she looked. She opened one eye, cocked her head, and there were dozens of the wee little fairy people. Oh, and they were sorely vexed to see the mess that she had made in the field. And one of them said, oh, if we could only get our hands on wee Meg Barnaleg, we'd teach her a lesson. We teach her a good lesson. Do you think Meg Barnaleg was scared of 50 or so, or maybe more, wee little fairies? It would take 200 of them to make one her size, she thought. And so she stood up. She put her hands on her hips as she was, She stuck out her tongue and she chinned them, you know. Oh, so you want Meg Barnaleg? Here I am. What are you going to do about it? Oh, she was standing up above all those fairies, just bold like that. Well, the fairies didn't really speak. Without saying a word, they made a little fairy ring around her. They stood in a circle around her, and they played a little song on a little flute that they have. Now, I wish I knew exactly what that song was that they sang, and I don't have a flute, but I do have a fairy harmonica. So I'll just try and imagine what they might have been playing as they danced around wee Meg Barnaleg in a circle. That's my wee fairy harmonica. Well, as they did that, suddenly Meg Barnaleg, who tried to grab one, found herself frozen to the spot. She couldn't move an arm, a leg, a muscle. She couldn't even blink her eyes. Everything was frozen. And she tried to speak. She wanted to say one of those words that I don't want to say here, but she found herself tongue-tied. She found, oh, go ahead, say one of those nice pleasantries you're always throwing about, said one of the fairies, now speaking for the first time, but she couldn't say. It was like her tongue was stuck to the top of her mouth. She tried to scream, but she couldn't. And now the fairy said, let's pinch her. Let's pinch her down into fairyland. And they were pinching her hands, her feet, her ears, her nose, her lips. And she tried to scream, but she couldn't. And finally, they gave one little pull on one of her hairs, and up she jumped. And now she did scream, but when she came down, down, it seemed as if the earth itself opened up and as if Meg Barnaleg was falling down towards the center of the earth. Plop, she landed. And there she was in a beautiful, mostly beautiful green place. She was in the fairy kingdom below the ground. She looked about, and there were those fairies that had been dancing around her and many more. And then one of the fairies said to her, Meg Barnaleg, well, we've got you with us now. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. I forgot one thing. I do have to go back. It happens sometimes. Right before, while she was frozen and couldn't move, suddenly they said, Meg Barnaleg, look over there where you had been sleeping. We've left a fairy changeling there. I had to find out what a fairy changeling was when I first read that. But it was a little creature. Oh, it was about this big, and it looked like a combination of a slimy slug and a cockroach. But as she looked, it grew and grew and got larger and larger and larger until it was exactly the size of Meg Barnaleg herself. And then as it began to change, it turned into something that looked exactly like Meg Barnaleg's twin. The fairy said, when your parents come looking for you later, they're going to see the changeling there and think that it's you and bring that changeling back to your very own bed. And they won't know what it is. And they won't be missing you, Meg Barnaleg. Now she's back down, right? She's back down in the fairies. And the fairy said, Meg Barnaleg, we've got some work for you to do. Look about. And they took her to this other place. And she looked around. And what did she see? She saw apple peelings, half-eaten scones, lumpy piles of uneaten oatmeal. The king of the fairies, or the leader, said, Meg Barnaleg, this is all the food for years and years that you've been thrown across the floor and wasted. This wonderful food that your mother made with so much love that you threw away, and it's littering up. Look at this. Look how ugly that is. Meg Barnaleg, you're not leaving this place until you pick up every scrap of that food that you've wasted. And you put it in these bins, and that's what you're going to eat until it's gone. You'll have no fresh food. Well, Meg Barnaleg, now she was speaking, and she said, I won't do it. I won't do it. I want something decent to eat right now. The fairies just laughed and said, well, if you don't eat, you'll starve. And sooner rather than later, she realized that they weren't joking. And so I can't tell you how long it took, but it was a long time. Meg Barnaleg picked up every scrap of all that food that she had thrown and wasted, the food that had been made with love. And yes, that's what she had to eat, whether it was for weeks or months. But finally, she had eaten it all. And then the fairies brought her a mug of warm, sweet milk and a fresh baked bun. And it was like the sweetest, most delicious meal that she had ever had. She said, all right, let me go home now. Not so fast, said one of the fairies. They took her to another place. Now all the beautiful green grass in this place was covered with dirty, torn, and tattered clothes. Can you picture it? And what clothes were those? You might be asking, or perhaps you already know. These were all the fine dresses that Meg Barnaleg's mother had made with all that love, that she had torn and tattered and thrown away. And the fairy said, Meg Barnaleg, you've got more work to do now. More work to do now. You're going to pick up all these clothes. You're going to wash them. You're going to mend them, and you're going to fold them. And Meg Barnaleg looked at them, and she said, again, using one of those words that I'm not going to repeat, I'd rather die than do this work in your ugly fairy place. That's what she said. Oh, really? And she happened to notice that as she said that, almost like magic, a little thorn bush grew up at her feet. Oh, Meg, you're going to do this work. And then you see that thorn bush that just grew up. Every time you say one of those nasty words, every time you've said one of those nasty words in your life, a thorn bush has grown up here in fairyland. So you're going to have more work to do after you finish the mending. And at that point, Meg thought, I better not say anything else. And again, how long it took, I can't tell you it. It took longer to do all that work than it did to pick up and eat all that food. And so she washed and she sewed and mended and folded. And after a time, all those clothes that her mother had made with all that love lay neatly stacked and folded. She wanted to go home, but she remembered what the fairies said, and they did. They took her to another place. Have you ever? I had thorn bushes in my backyard when I grew up as a kid. Blackberry thorns and green briar thorns, and they were everywhere. Everywhere she looked. Every once in a while, there was a beautiful little flower growing up between the thorns. But the fairy said, "You're going to pull these up, and then we'll talk about you going home." Well, there was nothing that she could do but to start to work, and she had to do it barehanded. Imagine this, and there were hundreds of them. There were pulling them up by hands, and sometimes her hands were bruised, and sometimes her hands were bleeding. But slowly, surely, she picked pulled out those thorns by the roots. And now you could begin to see the beautiful pink flower here and a blue flower there. They'd been hidden by all the thorns, but now you could see these beautiful flowers in the fields. Can you see them? And the time came when she pulled that last thorn bush out. Oh, she took a big, big sigh of relief. She looked around. She knew her work was done. She saw the beauty of those few flowers that were now in the field and imagining more and more of them being able to come out now that the thorns were gone. And she felt a gladness in her heart. And what did she do? She kind of kicked up her heels and she did a little dance. And the fairies were watching. They said, "Meg Barleg, you're a good dancer. You're a fine dancer. You know how much we love to dance. We were going to dance that midsummer night's day that full moon, that day that you teased the dog and made so much trouble. That's what we were going to do. But a year has passed since you've been here, and it's midsummer again, and you love to dance. Would you like to come up above with us and dance with us?" Imagine being down there for that whole year and all that work. Did she want to dance with the fairies? She did. Of course she did. They took her up above. And a full moon on midsummer's night, I did a little research on this. It only happens about once every 50 years. Oh, the moon was coming up. She felt that gladness in her heart. And she felt the beautiful, cool, green grass of the earth up above under her feet. And she could feel the warm summer breeze across her cheek. And she could smell her neighbor's roses far off, that beautiful rose smell coming. Everything was beautiful, and the moonlight was coming up. And she danced with joy. But then as she was dancing, she remembered something. She remembered, many of you know this, if you can find a four-leaf clover, you can make a wish. She kept that thought in her mind as she danced with the fairies. And so as she would dance around, and I'm not going to really dance here, I'll go off the screen, but she was dancing, and then she would kind of hunker down. She would go down and look carefully at the ground, hoping that maybe she would see, before she came back up again, a four-leaf clover. She danced and danced, and I think it was about midnight. She saw one. She saw a four-leaf clover at her feet, and she was quick enough to grab it up. And the second that she did, Meg Barnaleg held that four-leaf clover up to the moon. What did she wish for? What did she say? I want to go home. And before you can say superfluous flibberty flabberty 3 times, she was back in her own bed. I guess the fairy changeling had disappeared in a puff of invisibility. And her parents saw her eyes flutter for the first time. It looked like she was waking up, and she did. She woke up. Oh, her parents were overjoyed. She woke up. She sat up. She looked around her room. And what do you think the very first thing that Meg Barnaleg said when she woke up? Bob C., what do you think the very first thing she said? What were the first words out of her mouth when she woke up? Or Despina, what did she say?
I'm home. I'm happy.
I'm home.
Forgive me.
Anyone else? The very first words that she said to her parents, and I thought maybe, I love you. I'm sorry. The very first words she said were, she asked a question. She said, "Mom, Dad, is Juicy Bones okay?" She was worried about Juicy Bones. And her parents knew that something during that long year that she was gone for them, seemingly asleep in her bed, but you know where she was, something had changed. something had changed in Meg Barnaleg's heart. Oh, she was a changed young girl. And then she became a beautifully changed young lady. Eventually, Meg Barnaleg married. She had children of her own. She had grandchildren of her own. And there might be, I know there's some Irish storytellers in the World Storytelling Cafe audience. And if you ever go to County Donegal, because apparently that's where she was from, uh, and you see the most wonderfully mannered young child who's still full of glee and maybe a little bit of mischief, they'll say that must be one of the great, 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 great granddaughters of wee Meg Barnaleg. That's all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, wow, what a wonderful time. Let's give it up once again for Bob Kanegis. I hope I said the last name right. I always mess it up.
You got it right, Baba C. And thank you. I think that's our time, right?
Yes.
It
And
is.
hoping that John would click back in about now, but he hasn't. So once again, thank you. I put in the notes to Baden that I was considering your storytelling as one of my birthday part of my birthday celebration. I turned 72 just passed on August 4th, and I'm still celebrating. And this has been a wonderful way to do it.
Happy birthday.
Baden is thanking you for the story.
Happy birthday. And hey, let me say one more thing before I sign off. I heard from a storyteller from a different part of Ireland years and years ago. He told me what he considered to be the storyteller's secret. So I'll just share that with anybody who's listening. If you hear a story that you like, or a story that I told today, or a story that you hear, you've heard, that you will hear in the future, and you want to remember it, tell it to somebody today or tonight before the sun comes up the next day, or the day that you hear a story, tell it before the sun comes up the next day. You'll remember it for the rest of your life. And if you can't find a person, if you have to tell it to a fairy changeling, tell it to a fairy changeling, or tell it to your pet guinea pig or your baby brother or sister. But it's true. I've tried it. You'll remember the story for the rest of your life. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining me from wherever in the world you are.
Thank you for telling the story. Let me get in a note real quick. On Wednesday, August 14th, which was my mother's birthday, on Wednesday, August 14th, Justine Demiris, and I hope I got her name correct, will be doing Tales and Tunes, 7 p.m. UK time. And next Friday, I don't have a note for who's telling next week on next Friday, but please tune in. And a reminder, every time we tell the stories, there's a little hat next to the icon for the storyteller of that Friday. Please feel free to make a donation because storytellers have to eat too. And that's no tale, pun intended. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Baden, thank you. Oh, Baden says he loves a good comeuppance story, and he thanks you, and he did a lot of emojis for you. So my name is Baba C, sitting in for Despina and also for John Rowe. And I'm here to tell you that a tale well told is worth telling again. So keep those tales a coming. All right. Thank you, Bob. Oh,
Thank you, Baba.
And thanks. Thank you. And thanks for Waleed for flying the magic carpet ride. And thank everybody on Facebook and other
Thank you, Waleed.
Social platforms. All right, everybody. Until Wednesday and next Friday. Stay cool, but most of all, stay you. Thanks, Bob.
Okay. Adios, everybody.
Until the next time, to be continued. All right, Wally, just for you. See out.